The wealthy executive clocked out early, but nothing could have prepared him for the shock waiting on his own front lawn. Alejandro stepped out of his sleek black sedan and froze, rooted to the spot, unable to take another step toward the entryway. The scene unfolding in the golden afternoon light didn't just surprise him. It completely contradicted every report he'd been fed for the past 6 months. His grip slackened, and the expensive Italian leather briefcase slipped from his hand, hitting the grass with a heavy thud that went entirely unnoticed, drowned out by a sound he thought had vanished from this estate forever. The wild, unfiltered laughter of his twin boys. Technically, Alejandro wasn't even supposed to be in the country. His flight to London for the year's biggest banking merger was set to depart in 3 hours, but a sudden cancellation at the board level had handed him a free afternoon, a unicorn event for a tycoon whose time was usually calculated in 7-figure sums. He'd decided to pull a surprise visit, hoping to catch a late lunch with his fiancée, Isabel, and give the kids a proper goodbye. But as he slipped through the side garden gate, trying to bypass security and keep things low-key, the sight that greeted him hit him harder than a freight train. There, on the vintage wooden swing set he'd restored in a desperate, failed attempt to bring them joy, sat Lucas and Mateo, the very same boys Isabel painted every night as uncontrollable, hysterical wrecks shattered by their mother's death. These were the kids who, according to his fiancée, did nothing but scream and smash furniture the moment they were left unsupervised. Yet, what Alejandro was witnessing right now was nothing short of a miracle. The twins were soaring through the air, heads thrown back in roaring delight, pushed by yellow-gloved hands that guided them with a firm, tender touch. It was Elena, the new housekeeper. Isabel had hired just a month ago, claiming no one else can stomach your children. Alejandro barely knew the woman. She was usually just a silent shadow in a blue uniform and white apron, always averting her gaze whenever he walked into a room. Isabel had actually warned him about her just this morning while fixing his tie. "Watch out for that girl, Alejandro. I think she's a bit too rough with the boys. I've seen them tear up when she gets close, but I can't fire her yet. We need someone to clean up their messes." Those words rang in Alejandro's mind like a poisonous bell as he watched the truth unfold. Elena wasn't being rough. She was darting back and forth, giving Lucas a gentle shove before sprinting over to boost Mateo, pulling silly faces that sent the boys into fresh fits of giggles. The sunlight caught the housekeeper's face, and, despite the sweat and physical exertion, she was beaming with a joy so genuine it made Alejandro's heart ache. There wasn't a trace of fear in his son's eyes, no trauma, just absolute adoration for this humble woman who, on paper, was just another name on the household payroll. The executive felt his knees go weak. The gap between Isabel's daily status reports and this idyllic reality was a canyon. How many times had he come home late to a silent house, finding Isabel sighing and exhausted, claiming the boys had been absolute hellions? How many times had he avoided going into the nursery simply because he was terrified of causing them pain, convinced by his fiancée that seeing him only reminded them of their late mother? "Higher, Elena! Higher!" Mateo shouted, his usually slurred speech forming a crystal-clear sentence. Alejandro felt his throat tighten. Just last week, Isabel insisted Mateo had a severe speech delay and needed to be shipped off to a Swiss boarding school for therapy. But the boy was speaking. He was demanding more. And Elena laughed back. "To the sky, sweetie. Let's touch the clouds." Her voice completely lacked the submissive tone she used indoors. It was warm, maternal, and radiated a protective energy that seemed to wrap the entire garden in a hug. Alejandro instinctively stepped forward, desperate to burst into the scene and hold his sons, but he hesitated. His business survival instinct kicked in, that sharp gut feeling that helped him spot fraud in a balance sheet instantly. If he barged in now, the magic would shatter. Elena would snap to attention, bow her head, and revert to the help. More importantly, he wouldn't find out why he'd been lied to. He needed more data. He had to understand the true operating dynamics of his home when his back was turned. With his heart hammering against his ribs, Alejandro slowly backed away, concealing himself behind the massive trunk of the ancient oak tree that presided over the lawn. From that vantage point, he became a spy in his own life, loosening his tie as he struggled to catch his breath. What he was about to uncover threatened to turn his upcoming nuptials into ash, yet he couldn't tear his eyes away. His boys were beaming, radiating a joy that definitely didn't stem from their future stepmother, nor from the mountain of overpriced gadgets he'd bought to band-aid his own absence. No, that light in their eyes was all thanks to the woman in yellow rubber gloves, currently pausing the swing to tenderly dry Lucas's forehead with her own sleeve. From the shadows of the old oak tree, Alejandro narrowed his gaze, scrutinizing every gesture with the same intensity he usually reserved for vetting billion-dollar mergers. What played out just yards away was heartbreakingly intimate. Elena had brought the playground to a halt and dropped to her knees in the grass. She didn't loom over them with typical adult superiority. She met them right there, eye to eye, soul to soul. Alejandro watched as she frantically peeled off one of those yellow gloves. Lucas, the Shire twin, had managed to scuff his knee sliding off the swing seat. Based on Isabel's horror stories, Alejandro braced for a meltdown, but the boy didn't scream. He just pouted and held out his leg. Elena's next move completely floored the tycoon. She didn't panic or sprint for the first aid kit, nor did she scold him for being clumsy. Instead, she blew a cool breath on the angry red mark and planted a comically loud smooch right on the kneecap, coaxing a nervous giggle out of him. "All better, my brave soldier," she murmured, her rough, hard-working hand cradling his face as if he were made of the finest glass. "Auntie Elena's magic kiss fixes everything, doesn't it?" Both boys nodded furiously before tackling her in a massive bear hug. A jagged pang of jealousy sliced through Alejandro, a poisonous cocktail of envy and deep shame. Those tiny arms clinging to the blue uniform, blonde heads tucked into her shoulder. That sacred space belonged to him. Or to Isabel. But Isabel wouldn't be caught dead kneeling in the dirt. She claimed grass stains were the mortal enemy of designer silk. And she certainly didn't give kisses like that, insisting that coddling turned children into weak, dependent softies. Alejandro squeezed his eyes shut, flashing back to last night's dinner conversation. Isabel had spent a solid hour droning on about Elena's incompetence. "She's filthy, Alejandro. She misses dust in the corners, and I actually caught her eating the children's leftovers. It's revolting. We need to sack her before the wedding and bring in a proper British governess." Too exhausted to fight, he had nodded along, mentally agreeing to terminate the one woman who, as he now saw, was the only source of warmth his sons had. The disconnect between reality and Isabel's narrative was violent enough to induce nausea. If Elena was a monster, why did the boys turn to her like flowers seeking the sun? If Isabel was so perfect, why did they freeze up the moment she walked in? Suddenly, the energy in the garden shifted. Elena stiffened, the laughter dying in her throat as she scrambled to her feet, smoothing her apron with frantic swipes. Her hands shook as she jammed the yellow rubber glove back on. From his vantage point, Alejandro was confused until the sound reached him, the sharp, staccato clack of high heels striking the stone path. Unbelievable. Isabel's voice sliced through the afternoon heat like a shard of ice. "I pay you to scrub, not to play mommy." Alejandro's grip on the tree bark tightened until his knuckles turned white as Isabel strutted into view. She was draped in flawless cream silk, eyes hidden behind dark shades, completely oblivious to her fiancé lurking in the foliage. Her entire posture screamed dominance and aggression. She marched straight for the swing set, looking right through the children, who instinctively recoiled and clung to Elena's legs for protection. "Miss Isabel, I finished the upstairs bathrooms," Elena stammered, head bowed in submission. The boys were so sad and bored inside. "I just thought 5 minutes of fresh air would do them good." "You thought?" Isabel let out a hollow, cruel cackle. "I don't pay you to think, you simpleton. I pay you to keep this estate pristine for my husband's arrival. Imagine if he walked in and saw you wasting time with these brats." Alejandro felt the blood surge in his veins. The word brats spilled from his fiancé's lips with such casual disdain. It was clearly her standard way of referring to his flesh and blood. "Get over here, now!" Isabel barked at the twins, clicking her fingers the way one summons a stray mongrel. Neither child budged. Instead, little Mateo buried his face in Elena's uniform, clutching the fabric of her skirt in a death grip. Enraged by the public defiance, Isabel lunged forward. She snatched Mateo's arm and yanked him so hard the poor boy nearly lost his footing, stumbling sideways. "Don't you make me say it twice," she screeched. A high-pitched, terrified wail erupted from Mateo. That sound shattered Elena's reserve. Forgetting her rank, ignoring the terror of losing her paycheck, she stepped in, physically shielding the child from the wealthy socialite. "Please, ma'am, you're hurting him." "You'll dislocate his shoulder," Elena pleaded, her voice trembling but resolute. Isabel's eyes widened. "You dare lecture me on how to handle my own future stepchildren?" Isabel raised a hand, palm open and rigid, poised to slap the nanny across the face. "You insolent little... Get your rear to this kitchen immediately before I toss you out on the street without a dime." That was the final straw for Alejandro. The illusion shattered completely. The poised, compassionate woman he intended to marry in 2 weeks was nothing but a hollow sham. Conversely, the quiet maid he had planned to let go was the only one acting as a human shield for his flesh and blood. He knew he had to step in, yet a direct confrontation would solve nothing. Isabel would just spin a narrative, burst into tears, and blame pre-wedding jitters. No, he needed to play this smart. He had to let her hang herself with her own lies. Taking a deep breath, he adopted his best poker face, the cool, detached executive mask, and stepped out from the shadows, crunching his boots loudly on the gravel path. "Isabel!" Alejandro's voice boomed across the garden, feigning sudden arrival. "What on earth is going on?" The reaction was instantaneous. Isabel spun around, and in the blink of an eye, her features morphed. The snarl vanished, replaced instantly by a dazzling, practiced smile. She dropped Mateo's arm like a hot coal and rushed toward Alejandro, arms wide. "Darling, what a wonderful surprise," she chirped, leaning in for a kiss. Alejandro subtly turned his head, forcing her lips to land harmlessly on his cheek. "You're early. Thank goodness you're here," she continued without missing a beat. "I was just reprimanding Elena. You wouldn't believe how negligent she's been." Alejandro gazed right past Isabel's shoulder. Elena stood there, face drained of color, fighting back tears while silently rocking Mateo. The billionaire locked eyes with the terrified nanny. In that brief connection, without an attention, he tried to project a silent plea. "Hold on. Don't give up on me yet." But Elena just looked down, bracing for the inevitable firing, certain the master of the house would side with his fiancée, as they always did. Alejandro's jaw tightened. The game was on. The evening breeze seemed to die down, as if the garden itself was holding its breath, waiting for the massive lie Isabel was about to spin. He could feel the physical weight of his fiancée's arms draped around his neck. It was an embrace that reeked of expensive French perfume and absolute treachery. She rested her head against his chest, feigning a tremble of relief, but while her face was hidden from him, her eyes remained fixed on Elena, shooting icy daggers of warning at the helpless maid. "Thank God you're home," Isabel sighed with calculated theatricality, pulling back just enough to look up at him with wide, rehearsed distress. "I was on the verge of a complete breakdown. You have no idea what just happened." Alejandro held her gaze steady. It took every ounce of willpower he possessed not to shove her away in disgust. His hands, itching to tear off her mask, instead settled gently on her waist. He had to play his part. If he wanted to ensure his children's safety permanently, he had to bury Isabel using her own tactics. "What is it, darling?" Alejandro asked, keeping his voice deep and controlled. "I could hear you screaming from the driveway. You sounded unhinged." Isabel shook her head, summoning a look of righteous indignation. She thrust an accusing finger at Elena, her perfectly manicured nail leveled at the chest of the woman still cradling the twins on the grass. "Unhinged? No, Alejandro, I was terrified," Isabel lied without a single blink. "I came out to check on things and found this woman, this negligent incompetent, fast asleep on the bench in the shade." "Asleep, Alejandro." Meanwhile, the children were climbing the perimeter fence. Mateo already had one leg over the side. He almost fell right into the traffic. If I hadn't caught him that exact second. The fabrication was so detailed, so horrific, that Alejandro felt a chill run down his spine. But he had been there. He had watched Elena running, sweating, playing tag with them. He had seen the children safely on the swing set, nowhere near the fence. Yet what cut him deepest was Elena's reaction to the slander. The nanny didn't scream, didn't fight back, didn't call Isabel a liar. She simply bowed her head, biting her lip until it turned white, and pulled the children tighter against her chest, as if her body could shield them from the poisonous lies filling the air. "Is that accurate?" Alejandro asked, pivoting to face Elena. He had to gauge the depth of the employee's fear. He needed to know if she would crack. Elena looked up, her dark eyes swimming in unshed tears, yet broadcasting a silent, desperate plea. She flicked her gaze to Isabel, who made a motion so slight it was barely there, a hand drawn across the neck. A promise of instant termination. Elena understood the stakes. If she was fired, those boys would be left defenseless against their stepmother. "Sir, Elena's voice fractured. She swallowed hard, locking eyes with the twins who watched her like she was their entire world. "I am responsible for their safety. If Miss Isabel says there was a danger, the fault is mine alone. I am deeply sorry, Mr. Alejandro. It won't happen again." A sharp mix of admiration and heartache pierced Alejandro's chest. She was accepting a phantom blame to avoid being cast out, just to stay and shield his sons. It was a quiet martyrdom worth more than every asset in his portfolio. Isabel let out a triumphant huff, crossing her arms as she waited for the verdict. "You see? She admits it herself," Isabel said, her voice dripping with restored arrogance. "Alejandro, this ends now. I know you're flying out today, but I refuse to be left alone with someone I can't trust. We should cut her loose right now. I have a contact for an elite nanny agency that can have a professional here by tomorrow." This was the tipping point. Alejandro knew caving meant stripping his children of their only true ally. But a flat refusal would trip Isabel's radar. He had to play the gray area. "Isabel, my flight isn't for 3 hours, but the first meeting got scrapped. I have a few hours to kill before heading to the airport," Alejandro said, sidestepping the demand. "I'm not dealing with agencies and interviews right now. I'm exhausted. I just want to see my sons." Alejandro untangled himself from Isabel and strode toward the group on the lawn. Isabel stiffened. She detested it when he got too close to the kids, always terrified the twins might say something, innocent as they were. "Honey, keep your distance, they're filthy," she warned, dogging his heels. "They've been wallowing in the dirt like animals. Elena has no concept of hygiene." Alejandro tuned her out. He dropped to a crouch before Elena and the twins. The boys flinched, a gut-level recoil born of an absent father and a stepmother who punished them for existing. But then Mateo cast a glance at Elena. She gave him the barest nod, a silent permission slip, a safety net. That tiny signal shifted the entire dynamic. Mateo took a shaky step toward Alejandro, pressing a mud-caked hand against the pristine lapel of his expensive suit. "Daddy," the boy whispered. Alejandro felt something shatter inside him. He couldn't recall the last time he'd heard that word without Isabel orchestrating it for a family portrait. "Hey there, champion," Alejandro replied, his voice rough with emotion. He took in the grass stains on their knees, then the raw redness of Elena's hands from pushing swings all afternoon. Rising to his full height, he loomed over the garden. "Elena!" Alejandro barked, channeling the cold executive to keep the charade alive for Isabel. "Get the boys inside, scrub their hands and faces. Make sure they're presentable and bring a strong coffee to my study. We need to discuss this fence incident." Isabel smirked, victory sweet on her tongue. She assumed he planned to sack the help behind closed doors to avoid a scene in front of the children. "Excellent decision, darling," Isabel cooed, latching onto his arm again. "Be hard on her. She needs to learn who runs this house. You handle the help. I'm going to touch up my makeup. This whole ordeal has been murder on my nerves." She spun around and marched toward the mansion, heels clicking a rhythm of pure conceit, never once looking back at the children she claimed were in mortal danger. Alejandro waited until she vanished through the French doors before turning back to Elena. The stone mask of his face cracked for a split second. "Let's go inside," he said, the edge gone. "Don't be afraid." The mansion's interior was dead silent, a jarring shift from the pulse of life in the garden. The air conditioning blasted a frigid, clinical chill, perfect for preserving antiques and fine art, but hostile to a home with children. Strolling down the main corridor, the sterility of his own house finally hit Alejandro. No stray toys in the living room, no family snapshots on the side tables, just fashion periodicals and Decker catalogs fanned out with military precision. This was Isabel's showroom, not a kingdom for his sons. Elena trailed a few paces behind him, anchoring the twins with a firm grip on their hands. The children walked in total silence, heads bowed low, as if stepping through that doorway instantly drained every ounce of joy from their bodies. Alejandro froze at the base of the massive marble staircase and turned back. "Get them settled in their rooms, please. Then meet me in my study, right away." His baritone voice echoed through the hollow foyer. "Yes, sir," Elena replied. She barely made a sound. Alejandro stood there, watching them make the long climb upstairs. He watched Elena scoop up little Lucas when a step proved too steep, murmuring soft comforts until the tension left the boy's shoulders. It was a silent ballet of motherhood, performed right there in the gloom of his own home. Alejandro retreated to his office, a dim sanctuary smelling of aged leather and cigar smoke. He shut the heavy door and slumped against the wood, eyes shut tight. His pulse hammered against his ribs. A beast of pure fury clawed at his gut. Isabel's voice replayed in his mind. She was asleep. The children could have died. The lie had slipped out so effortlessly. If he hadn't come home early, if he hadn't witnessed it himself, he would have bought her story. Elena would be gone, and his sons would be left alone with that monster. Pushing off the door, he strode to his mahogany desk and slid open a concealed compartment, revealing the control hub for a surveillance grid he'd never fully brought online. He'd rigged the place with hidden lenses months ago, driven by corporate paranoia and fear of industrial spies. He never imagined the target would be his own household. Fingers flying, he synced the feed to his phone, confirming every lens in the common areas was live. A crimson recording dot pulsed on the screen. All systems go. A few minutes later, a hesitant knock broke the silence. "Enter!" Alejandro called out, dropping into his leather chair and stiffening his spine. Elena stepped inside. She'd ditched the soiled apron, but grass stains still marred the hem of her simple blue dress. No coffee tray this time. She walked in with hands clasped tight, looking like a convict walking to the gallows. She shut the door softly and hovered by the entrance, too terrified to step onto the expensive Persian rug. "Come closer, Elena," Alejandro commanded. He didn't offer her a chair. He had to maintain the appearance of authority in case Isabel barged in. Elena shuffled forward until she stood across the desk, shaking like a leaf. "Sir, I swear on my life I wasn't asleep," she blurted out, the words tumbling over each other. "I know Miss Isabel is your fiancée, and I mean no disrespect, but I would never let harm come to Lucas or Mateo. Those boys are my world." Alejandro scrutinized her, the rough hands, the shadows under her eyes, but mostly he saw the raw, piercing truth in her gaze. "So why did you lie back there?" Alejandro asked, cutting to the chase. "Why take the fall if you were innocent?" Elena froze, blindsided. She parted her lips to speak, then faltered. "The truth, Elena," Alejandro pressed, leaning over the desk. "I'm done playing games." "Why let her humiliate you like that?" Elena took a breath deep enough to dive underwater. "Because, if I argued, sir, she would have fired me on the spot. And if I'm gone, who makes sure the children eat?" Her voice grew steadier, fueled by a fierce, protective anger. "Miss Isabel doesn't know their diet. She doesn't know Lucas is terrified of the dark, or that Mateo needs a lullaby to settle down. If I leave, they're alone. I'd rather you think I'm incompetent than leave those boys defenseless." The silence that followed hung heavy in the room. A wave of profound shame washed over Alejandro. Here was a woman on minimum wage, ready to torch her own dignity just to shield his sons. Meanwhile, he, the brilliant CEO, had been blind for months. "Isabel told me the boys are out of control," Alejandro said, casting the bait. "She claims they scream, break furniture, that they're too much for you to handle." Elena shook her head slowly, a bitter smile touching her lips. "They aren't wild, sir. They're heartbroken. They miss their mother." She paused, glancing nervously at the door as if Isabel might materialize through the wood. "And they're scared." "Scared of what?" Alejandro stood up slowly. "Of her," Elena whispered. "Sir, I shouldn't speak on this, but when you're gone, the rules change. They aren't allowed out of their room. No noise allowed. If they cry, she locks them in the linen closet. She calls it reflection time." Alejandro slammed his fist onto the desk, a sharp, violent crack that made Elena jump. "The closet?" he snarled. The thought of his sons trapped in the pitch black made him see red. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Would you have believed me, sir?" Elena asked. The simplicity of the question destroyed him. "She wears the engagement ring. I scrubbed the floors. Nobody listens to the help." Alejandro collapsed into his chair, crushed by the weight of the truth. She was right, though. If Elena had come to him a week ago with this story, he would have fired her on the spot for slander. Isabel had spun her web with terrifying precision. Suddenly, the office door flew open, shattering the silence. Isabel breezed in, makeup reapplied like war paint and a tight, fake smile plastered on her face. "Still here?" she sneered, looking at Elena like she was dirt. "Alejandro, darling, I assumed you'd have thrown her out by now. We need to start packing your bags for the trip. Honestly, the stench of manual labor is stinking up your office." Alejandro finally looked up. His face was a mask of stone. He glanced from the maid to his fiancée, and the plan locked into place. He couldn't blow his cover yet. He needed Isabel to feel safe, invincible. He needed her to make that fatal slip-up while the cameras were rolling. "I was just giving her final instructions, Isabel." Alejandro lied, his voice dead calm. "Elena stays." Isabel's smile faltered. "Excuse me?" "After what she did, I can't find a replacement in 2 hours, Isabel. And I won't have you burdened with the children while you're prepping for the wedding." He improvised smoothly. "Elena stays on probation until I'm back from London, but believe me, she's getting a formal warning on her record." Isabel seemed to weigh her options. Push too hard, and she looks unhinged. Play along, and she only has to tolerate the help for a few days before having the mansion to herself. "Fine," she sighed, playing the martyr perfectly. "But keep her out of my sight. She stays in the servants' quarters with the brats, And Alejandro, when you return, she is gone. Oh, definitely. When I get back, a lot of things are going to change, Isabel. You have my word, Alejandro said, the hidden threat flying right over her head. Right. You, get out, pack the master's bags, and don't let those filthy hands touch my silk dresses, Isabel barked. Elena cast one desperate look at Alejandro. He gave the slightest nod, a silent vow of protection. She slipped out of the room. Alejandro was left alone with his bride-to-be, the woman who locked his flesh and blood in closets. She moved in to massage his shoulders. You're so tense, my love, she purred. It's good you're getting away for a few days. By the time you're back, we'll be husband and wife, and I can finally handle the children's education properly. We'll ship them off to that Swiss boarding school I mentioned. It's for their own good. Her fingers felt like talons digging into his skin. Yes, he said, staring at his dark reflection in the black computer monitor. It will be for the best. I'll make sure of that tonight. He stood up abruptly. I'm going to see the kids before I leave, he announced. And then, Isabel, you and I need to have a proper send-off. The trap was set. He would feign departure, she would drop the mask, and this time the whole world would see the monster underneath. Alejandro climbed the stairs to the east wing, every step feeling like he was dragging lead weights. The silence in the house didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a gag order. He paused outside the twins' door. A soft sound drifted out, a sweet humming melody. Elena. Even after the threats, even after the humiliation downstairs, she was here, singing away the terror Isabel had injected into their lives. He eased the door open. The room was massive, filled with expensive toys that looked like museum exhibits, never touched. Imported electric trains, modernist dollhouses, cold, sterile, and perfect. But the children ignored them. They were huddled on the rug, pressed tight against Elena, listening to a story from a tattered old book she must have brought from home. The moment they saw their father, the twins froze. Lucas ducked behind Elena's arm. The flinch hit Alejandro harder than a physical blow. His own children feared him. Or at least they saw him as the harbinger of Isabel and her punishments. Don't be scared, Alejandro said, forcing a smile that felt brittle. I just came to say goodbye. Elena started to scramble up out of respect, but Alejandro motioned sharply for her to stay on the floor. He loosened his tie, discarding the stiff protocol Isabel worshipped, and sat right on the carpet with them. He met their eyes on their level. Daddy has to go on a business trip, he explained, looking at Mateo. But I'll be back soon, sooner than you think. Are you going with the witch? Mateo asked with brutal honesty. Elena gasped, covering the boy's mouth instantly, her eyes wide with panic as she looked at Alejandro. Don't call Miss Isabel that, she hissed, terrified of the blowback. Sweetheart, keep your voice down, someone might hear you. A grim sense of vindication washed over Alejandro. The witch. His children had spotted the monster he'd been too blind to recognize. No, Miss Isabel isn't going anywhere, Alejandro announced. He watched true terror flash across Elena's face. She understood exactly what was coming. Open season for cruelty. Alejandro stepped closer, deliberately crowding the housekeeper's personal bubble. He had to make her grasp the subtext without spelling it out, just in case the room was bugged, or in case Isabel was pressing her ear against the door. Alejandro dropped his voice to a low, piercing register, locking eyes with her. Listen to me very carefully. I'm entrusting you with the only thing in this world that matters to me. I don't care what Isabel says. I don't care what orders she barks at you. Do not let those boys out of your sight. Are we clear? Elena blinked in confusion, but then she caught the ferocious gleam in the billionaire's eyes. This wasn't the apathy of an absentee boss, it was the intense focus of a conspirator. But sir, what if she orders me to lock them up? If she takes the keys, improvise. Resist, Alejandro whispered urgently. Just hold the line for a few hours. I swear to you, everything is about to change. Just trust me. Before Elena could utter a syllable, Isabel's shrill voice pierced the air from the hallway. Alejandro, the driver's got the engine running. You're going to miss your flight. The fragile bubble of conspiracy shattered instantly. Alejandro straightened up, his face instantly hardening into a mask of indifference. He gave Lucas and Mateo a quick, reassuring pat on the head. Be brave, boys, he murmured. Turning on his heel, he strode into the corridor and came face to face with Isabel. She'd already undergone a wardrobe change. She was sporting a black cocktail dress, far too glamorous for a quiet evening in. What is taking you so long? She whined, smoothing his lapel with a gesture that felt more like ownership than affection. You don't want to be late for London, darling. That banking merger is going to fund our second honeymoon, remember? Just making sure the brats won't be a nuisance tonight, Alejandro lied, his stomach churning as he brushed against her. You're awfully dressed up for a solo dinner, Isabel. For a split second, a flicker of panic crossed her eyes, but her predator's smile snapped right back into place. Oh, sweetheart, you know I never drop my standards. Besides, I invited Mother over for tea. I couldn't bear the thought of being all alone without you. Another blatant lie. Isabel's mother lived in Spain and loathed travel. Alejandro nodded, filing that little deception away in his growing arsenal of rage. Right then, I'm off. They descended the staircase side by side. In the foyer, the butler stood at attention with the door held wide. Night had descended, and a fine mist of rain was slicking the pavement, casting a gloomy pall over the estate. Call me the second you land, Isabel chirped, planting a kiss on his mouth. It was cold, hollow, a performance for an invisible audience. I will, Alejandro replied. But I won't be calling from London, he thought grimly. He stepped out into the rainy night and slid into the back of the armored sedan. The chauffeur, a loyal confidant named Roberto, caught his eye in the rearview mirror. To the airport, Mr. Alejandro? Alejandro waited until the vehicle cleared the main gates and put some distance between them and the estate. No, Roberto. Circle the block, kill the lights, and park at the service entrance, out of sight from the main house. Then hand me the tablet linked to the security feed. Roberto, a professional trained to bypass questions and go straight to execution, obeyed immediately. The car executed a silent turn, gliding through the rain like a phantom. Alejandro woke the tablet screen. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the electric hum of adrenaline and dark anticipation. The horror show was about to premiere, and he had secured a front-row seat. The screen's pale blue glow cast harsh shadows on Alejandro's tense features within the darkened cabin. Above, the rain hammered against the armored roof, beating out a hypnotic, claustrophobic rhythm. On the display, the stark black-and-white feed from the foyer camera captured the heavy front door swinging shut. Alejandro watched as Isabel stood motionless before the sealed exit for several seconds, seemingly confirming that the coast was truly clear. Then, her entire demeanor shifted. The rigid elegance and the perfect housewife smile dissolved like wax near a flame, exposing something far more grotesque underneath. Isabel threw her head back and unleashed a cackle that the high-fidelity microphone picked up with crystal clarity. She kicked off her heels and violently punted them against the wall, not giving a damn about scuffing the expensive plaster. Finally! She shrieked, throwing her arms up in a gesture of triumphant victory. God, that man is insufferable. I thought he'd never leave with his tedious sermons on cheap morality. Alejandro clenched his jaw so hard his teeth ached. He watched as Isabel fished a cell phone from her dress and punched in a number. She engaged the speakerphone and strutted into the main living area, helping herself to a generous pour from Alejandro's crystal whiskey decanter. He's gone, you idiot! Get over here! Isabel barked into the phone, her voice dropping the polished, sophisticated act she always performed when Alejandro was around. Yeah, he bought the business trip story, hook, line, and sinker. We've got the run of the place for 3 whole days. Bring the champagne, the vintage stuff, and the boarding school paperwork. I want that garbage signed and sealed. I'm shipping those little brats out first thing tomorrow. Alejandro felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Tomorrow? She wasn't even waiting until after the wedding. She had orchestrated this entire scheme to dump his children while he was supposedly halfway across the world in London. No doubt she planned to cook up some sob story later, maybe claim they ran away or there was an unavoidable emergency. What about the help? A male voice crackled through the speaker. The voice was unfamiliar to Alejandro, but the intimate, conspiratorial sneer in it made him nauseous. That peasant? She's irrelevant, Isabel scoffed, downing a heavy swig of whiskey. I've got her under my thumb. 1 word from her, and I frame her for theft. Besides, I'm going to make her earn her keep tonight. She can serve us dinner while we celebrate our victory. Isabel ended the call and marched to the base of the staircase. Alejandro swiped the screen on his tablet, switching camera feeds to track her movement. She paused at the bottom, tilting her head back to bellow with shocking volume. Elena, get down here this instant and bring those little monsters with you. Alejandro tapped into the second-floor hallway camera feed. Elena slipped out of the nursery, pulling the door shut behind her in a protective stance, then stepped nervously to the railing. Miss, they're already in their pajamas and settling down for the night? Elena tried to reason. I don't give a damn if they're unconscious. Isabel screamed from the foyer, Bring them down. I'm having company, and I won't have them whining overhead. Lock them in the basement laundry room. Nobody will hear a thing if they decide to scream. No. Alejandro's shout echoed inside the car, startling Roberto in the driver's seat. On the screen, Elena gripped the banister white-knuckled. Miss Isabel, please. The basement is freezing and damp. Mateo has asthma. He can't breathe down there. Just let them stay in their beds. I swear they'll be quiet as mice. Isabel charged up the stairs with the speed of a predator closing in on prey. The lens captured the precise moment she reached the landing and, without a word, delivered a vicious slap that whipped the nanny's head to the side. Who do you think you are, negotiating with me? Isabel hissed, bunching Elena's uniform collar in her fist. I run this house now. You do exactly as you're told. Get those brats downstairs and into the cellar. Or, so help me God, I'll call the cops right now and tell them I caught you beating them. Who do you think they'll believe? The future lady of the manor, or the hired help? Elena touched her stinging cheek, her hand trembling. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't budge. She planted her feet firmly in front of the nursery door, using her own body as a shield. No, Elena said. Her voice quivered, but the resolve was unmistakable. I won't let you throw them in that dungeon. Fire me. Call the police. Do whatever you want, but I'm not moving. A surge of pride swelled in Alejandro's chest, almost overpowering his rage. This woman, a stranger who had been under his roof for barely a month, was risking her entire future to protect his flesh and blood. Stunned by the defiance, Isabel took a step back and let out a laugh of pure disbelief. Oh, so you want to play the martyr? Have it your way. Isabel spun on her heel and stormed back down the stairs. Alejandro watched on the screen as she headed for the main entrance and threw the door open. A red sports car had just pulled up through the driving rain. A young man stepped out, draped in designer labels that couldn't quite hide his hustler vibe. Carlos, baby, Isabel cooed, pulling him into a heated kiss right in the doorway. We've got a situation with the help. I need you to teach the maid a lesson and help me haul some baggage down to the cellar. Carlos flashed a cruel, lopsided grin. Whatever you say, Queen. Is it the twins? I've been dying to teach those two some respect. Alejandro watched the man peel off his leather jacket and crack his knuckles. They were going up there. They were going to hurt Elena and his children. Roberto, Alejandro said, his voice dropping to the temperature of liquid nitrogen. Hit it. We're going to the front door, sir? No, Alejandro replied, his eyes glued to the screen as the thug and his fiancée started ascending the stairs toward where Elena stood trembling. Cut through the lawn, smash through the living room window if you have to. I want to be inside that house in 10 seconds. The armored sedan's engine roared to life like a waking dragon. Alejandro tossed the tablet aside. He'd seen enough. It was time for violence. His trap had worked a little too perfectly, and now he was in a frantic sprint against the clock to stop a massacre. The image of Elena, small, alone, and defiant against the nursery door, burned into his mind as the car surged toward the mansion. That upstairs hallway wasn't just a corridor anymore. It was a battlefield. Elena stood her ground, feet planted firmly before the white wooden door. Inside her chest, her heart hammered against her ribs like a panicked bird in a cage, the only barrier between the twins' innocence and the filth marching up the stairs. She possessed no weapon, held no fortune, and commanded no influence. All she had was her own flesh and bone, fueled by a silent vow she had sworn to the master of the house only minutes ago. Carlos, Isabel's paramour, crested the final step of the staircase. He was a hulking figure with broad shoulders and muddy eyes, wearing the cheap swagger of a man who has spent a lifetime leeching off other people's wealth. He loomed over Elena, violating her personal space with the stale stench of heavy musk and cigarettes. Behind him, Isabel smirked with pure malice. She watched the scene unfold like it was a private matinee performance. Move it, little girl, Carlos growled, cracking his knuckles. Don't make me drag you out. Trust me, I lack your boss's delicate touch. You aren't touching those. Her voice was barely a whisper, yet she stood her ground with unwavering resolve. Mr. Alejandro left strictly specific instructions that I am in charge. You have absolutely no authority here. Isabel's shrill laughter echoed off the corridor walls, mocking the very idea. Mr. Alejandro, she scoffed. That fool is halfway to London by now. Look around. I run this house. Carlos, get rid of her. I'm done with these theatrics. As the brute stepped forward, Elena squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the impact, but she refused to budge. She felt his massive, callous hands clamp down on her shoulders, the crushing force sending immediate waves of pain through her body. His fingers dug deep into her flesh through the thin fabric of her uniform before he violently tossed her aside like a rag doll. Elena slammed into the opposite wall with a sickening thud and crumpled to the floor, dazed. "Mama!" Lucas's muffled cry pierced through the bedroom door. He wasn't crying out for his late mother. He was screaming for Elena. Hearing him call for her ignited a primal fire within her, a surge of adrenaline that defied all logic. Ignoring the searing pain in her spine, she lunged at Carlos just as his hand grazed the doorknob. She wrapped her arms around his ankles in a desperate lock, becoming a dead weight he couldn't shake. "Let go, you psycho!" Carlos roared, trying to kick her off. His boot connected hard with her ribs, forcing the air from her lungs. But she refused to break her hold. "You are not going in there!" She screamed through tears of fury and terror. "You'll have to kill me first." Suddenly, the world downstairs erupted in chaos. It wasn't a polite knock or a doorbell ringing. It was the savage roar of a V8 engine redlining, followed immediately by the terrifying crash of shattering glass. Alejandro's armored sedan didn't bother with the driveway. Following extreme orders, Roberto plowed through the front lawn, mounted the 3-stone terrace steps, and rammed straight through the main hall's French doors. The vehicle burst into the foyer in a storm of timber and glass shards, screeching to a halt at the base of the grand staircase, the air instantly thick with burnt rubber. The violent impact sent a tremor through the entire mansion. Paintings rattled against the walls upstairs. Carlos froze mid-kick, completely paralyzed by the shock. Isabel rushed to the railing, her face drained of all color. "What on earth was that?" she whispered, her voice quivering. Alejandro stepped out of the smoking wreckage in the middle of the ruined foyer. He no longer looked like a businessman. With his coat undone, hair plastered to his skull by the rain, and eyes burning with a cold, homicidal glint, he looked like a demon on a warpath. He didn't say a word. He didn't even glance at the wreckage of his mansion. He just looked up, his gaze locking onto Isabel on the second floor. Isabel felt her blood turn to ice. She had seen Alejandro stressed over business deals, but she had never seen a look like that. That was the stare of a predator closing in on its kill. Alejandro took the stairs 2 at a time, moving with terrifying speed. "Carlos, let's go!" Isabel shrieked, panic setting in. "Do something!" Carlos's street instincts kicked in. He shoved Elena aside and spun around to face the threat. He flicked out a small pocket knife, a pathetic gesture of false bravado. "Easy there, pal," Carlos sneered, trying to sound tough. "Your lady invited me over, so—" He never finished the sentence. Alejandro wasn't here to negotiate. Alejandro crested this final step and slammed into Carlos with the force of a freight train. The collision was brutal. He drove a fist straight into the other man's jaw, a strike fueled by years of repressed pain, the rage of seeing his children suffer, and the guilt of his own blindness. A sickening crack echoed through the hall, and Carlos dropped to the floor like a sack of potatoes, out cold before he even hit the rug. Isabel let out a blood-curdling scream, stumbling backward over her own feet until she hit the wall. Alejandro stood over Carlos's limp body, chest heaving. Then, slowly, he turned his head toward Elena. She was still on the ground, uniform torn, clutching her ribs, but her eyes were fixed on him, swimming with tears of relief. "Are you hurt?" "What happened?" Alejandro asked, his voice completely transformed. Gone was the feral growl, replaced by a rough, desperate concern. Elena managed a faint nod as she struggled to get up. "The boys are inside," she rasped. "They never got in." "I made sure of it." Alejandro dropped to his knees beside her, paying absolutely no attention to Isabel, who was shaking uncontrollably in the corner. He gently supported Elena into a sitting position, his hands tenderly cupping her face as he scanned for severe injuries. He catalogued the damage, the angry red welt on her cheek where Isabel had struck her, and the grime coating her arms from the grapple with Carlos. "You did good," Alejandro whispered, his voice thick with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "Better than anyone else could have. I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner." He stood, carefully pulling Elena up with him. He turned to the bedroom door and eased it open. Huddled underneath the bed frame, Lucas and Mateo were clinging to each other, shaking. Even when they saw their father, they didn't rush him. Instead, their eyes darted past him, frantically searching for Elena. The moment they spotted their nanny safe in the doorway, they launched themselves like missiles, burying their faces in her legs and sobbing uncontrollably. Alejandro watched it unfold. His sons were finding comfort in the arms of the woman who had just endured a brutal beating to keep them safe. He was just a bystander in that moment, but for the first time in his life, jealousy was nowhere to be found. All he felt was overwhelming gratitude, a debt he knew no amount of wealth could ever repay. He quietly pulled the door shut to shield the boys from the sight of the unconscious body in the hall, then slowly pivoted toward Isabel. The silence that settled over the hallway was far more menacing than the screaming had been. The only sounds were Isabel's ragged breathing and the faint drumming of rain pouring through the shattered window downstairs. Carlos remained passed out on the floor, looking like nothing more than a pathetic stain on the expensive Persian runner. Alejandro didn't run. He didn't yell. He simply walked toward Isabel with a terrifyingly slow, deliberate gait, adjusting his blood-spattered cuffs with a calm that bordered on psychotic. Isabel threw her hands up, her eyes wide and frantic, darting around for an escape route that simply wasn't there. "Alejandro, wait, please listen to me." "It's not what it looks like," she stammered, falling back on the manipulation tactics that had always served her well. "That man forced his way in. He was trying to rob the place. I was just trying to protect the boys, and he threatened my life. Elena let him in. She's in on it, I swear." Alejandro stopped just a few feet away from her. He studied her with a cold, clinical fascination, as if he were examining a particularly repulsive cockroach under a microscope. "Is that so?" Alejandro asked softly. "So, Elena is the accomplice?" "Yes." Isabel clung to the lie like a drowning woman to a piece of driftwood. "I swear on my life, darling. I came home and found them conspiring together. They were planning to kidnap the twins. I ran upstairs to stop them and—" Alejandro pulled his phone from his pocket. With practiced ease, he stopped the security feed that had been streaming directly to his private cloud server and tapped a button on the screen. Isabel's voice boomed through the hallway, crystal clear from the device's speaker. "He's gone, you idiot! Get over here and bring the boarding school paperwork. I want those little bastards gone by tomorrow." Isabel froze, her mouth hanging open mid-sentence. The blood drained from her face, leaving her looking like a walking corpse. The sound of her own voice, dripping with venom and betrayal, hung in the air like a death sentence. "Oh, but we're not done," Alejandro said, swiping across the screen. "Here's the part where you order my children locked in the basement. And here is you assaulting Elena. And this one," he paused, thrusting the screen inches from her nose, "is you kissing this thief right at my front door." Isabel scrambled backward until she hit the wall. The reality set in. There was nowhere left to run. The victim mask crumbled, and for a fleeting second, the real Isabel, ambitious, cruel, vicious, surfaced for one last desperate strike. "You were spying on me," she hissed, her eyes burning with hatred. "That's illegal. You're a sick freak." "I am a father," Alejandro corrected her, pocketing the phone. "And you just made the last mistake you'll ever make." Just then, heavy footsteps thundered up the staircase. Roberto, the head of security and family driver, rounded the corner flanked by two armed guards who usually patrolled the estate grounds. "Mr. Alejandro," Roberto said, casting a look of pure disgust at the body on the floor. "Police are en route. I informed them we have a home invasion and an active case of child abuse caught in the act. I've also alerted the family attorney." "Thank you, Roberto," Alejandro replied, his gaze never wavering from Isabel. "Take this piece of garbage," he said, gesturing to Carlos, "and dump him at the front gate until the squad car gets here. And if he so much as twitches, you have my permission to use whatever force is necessary." Two guards hoisted Carlos up. He was just starting to groan and blink his eyes open, and dragged him downstairs without an ounce of gentleness. "Now, about you." Alejandro shifted his focus back to Isabel. Isabel smoothed her dress, trying to salvage some shred of dignity. "You can't kick me out. I have rights. We've lived together for 6 months. The law states—" Alejandro let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Isabel, you are missing the point. I'm not kicking you out. You are leaving in handcuffs. Child abuse, attempted assault, conspiracy. My lawyers are going to bury you. You won't have 2 dimes left to catch a bus back to the gutter you crawled out of. But before you go—" Alejandro stepped closer and with a lightning-fast motion snatched her left hand. She tried to fight back, but he wrenched the massive 3-carat diamond ring off her finger, not caring if he broke skin or bone in the process. "Only a real lady deserves to wear this," Alejandro sneered, glaring at the gem like it was contaminated before shoving it deep into his pocket. "And you're nothing but trash. You're going to pay for this," Isabel shrieked, totally coming unglued. "Your kids are absolute freaks, and that maid? She's just a broke gold digger chasing your wallet. I'm the prize here, you idiot." Suddenly, the nursery door creaked open behind them. Elena limped out, clutching her injured ribs. The twins were right on her heels, peeking out like scared little mice. Ignoring the pain, the nanny marched right up to Isabel, standing toe to toe. Her uniform was shredded, hair a mess, and a nasty bruise was blooming on her face, but she stood tall. In that moment, the battered servant looked like royalty compared to the rich, broken woman facing her. "Listen closely, Miss Isabel," Elena said, her voice deadly calm. "Insult me all you want. But if you call these babies monsters one more time, I'm going to forget my manners and finish this fight right here." Isabel drew breath to launch another toxic comeback, but one icy glare from Alejandro froze the words in her throat. It was the kind of look that promised consequences. "Get this trash out of my house," Alejandro barked at Roberto. The head of security grabbed her arm with a grip like iron. She started screeching and kicking wildly as he hauled her toward the staircase. Her vile cursing echoed off the walls until the front door, or at least the pieces left of it, slammed shut behind her. Quiet settled back over the hallway, but the heaviness was gone. The air felt lighter. It was a cleansing silence, crisp and fresh, like the world taking a breath after a hurricane passes. Alejandro stood there, rooted to the spot. As the adrenaline crashed, a wave of pure exhaustion washed over him. He turned to look at Elena and the kids. "It's done," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. The nightmare was finally over. Elena's legs gave out and she sank to her knees, the children rushing in to bury themselves in her arms. Watching them, Alejandro felt like an outsider in his own home, but he knew the healing started now. He took a tentative step forward, unsure if there was room for him in their huddled embrace. Mateo, his eyes puffy and red from all the crying, looked up from Elena's shoulder. He glanced at his dad, then at the door where the wicked woman had vanished, and reached out his tiny hand toward Alejandro. "Daddy, pal," Mateo chirped, swinging a little fist to mimic the knockout punch. Alejandro offered a smile, sad, yes, but entirely genuine, as he dropped to one knee, closing the gap to bring himself into their protective circle. "That's right, son. Daddy went boom. Nobody touches you ever again." But deep down, Alejandro knew kicking Isabel out was just the opening move. The trauma had already taken root. As he wrapped his arms around his boys and the woman who had been their shield, the heavy reality of the looming legal war and emotional recovery settled in. Isabel wasn't the type to walk away quietly, and as for Elena, well, she was carrying her own heavy burden of secrets that were still lurking in the shadows. Outside, the violent red and blue strobes of the police cruisers splashed against the stone mansion, turning the relentless rain into a macabre light show. The front lawn, once a manicured sanctuary of silence and wealth, had been utterly transformed. It was now a chaotic crime scene swarming with uniforms, the static of radios, and the harsh bark of command. Alejandro stood in the center of the wrecked foyer, his bespoke shirt ruined by plaster dust and someone else's blood, radiating an authority that kept even the police captain at a distance. "Sir, we need the young lady down at the station to file a formal statement regarding the assault," the officer said. He gestured vaguely toward the living room, where Elena remained seated. She looked diminished, seeming to occupy far less space than usual. Curled tight into the corner of the velvet sofa, she was draped in a silver thermal blanket the paramedics had left on her shoulders. Lucas and Mateo were glued to her sides, clinging like their lives depended on it, staring out at the officers with eyes wide and full of panic. They wouldn't release their grip on her tattered uniform for even a heartbeat. "She isn't going anywhere tonight," Alejandro cut in, his voice like cold steel. His tone brooked no argument. "My employee was attacked while defending my children. She stays. She's dealing with rib trauma and severe shock. If you need her testimony, you'll take it right here, and only after my physician gives the green light." The officer faltered, clearly rattled by the sheer authority radiating from the tycoon. He eventually nodded and backed off toward the exit, where his team was finishing cuffing Carlos. The man was conscious now, spitting out blood along with a stream of profanities and lawsuit threats. Isabel had already been hauled off, in a separate cruiser, screeching about some grand conspiracy against her. It was useless. The security footage Alejandro handed over on a flash drive had already nailed her coffin shut. Minutes later, the family's private physician arrived. He was an elderly, tactful man who had been looking after Alejandro since he was in short pants. He rushed in, medical bag in tow, stepping over the shattered remains of the French doors without batting an eye. "Alejandro, I got here as fast as I could," he said, making for the sofa. "Where are the injured? Check Elena," Alejandro commanded, completely ignoring his own swollen, bloody knuckles. "She took a heavy blow to the ribs and has facial trauma. The doctor approached Elena with a gentle bedside manner. "Miss, I need you to lower the blanket slightly so I can check your ribs." Elena's body went rigid. Her calloused, hard-working hands gripped the collar of her torn uniform tight. She cast a look of deep mortification toward Alejandro. It wasn't just the physical pain. It was the modesty of a humble woman unused to being the center of attention, let alone being examined in front of her billionaire employer in his own living room. "I'm fine, sir, truly. It was just a shove," she whispered, trying to downplay her sacrifice. "I don't want to be a bother." The doctor should look at the children first. Alejandro dropped to his knees right in front of her, filling her vision so she had to focus on him. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying a gentleness that stood in stark contrast to the night's brutality. "The boys are safe because of you. Now, let us take care of you, please." That single "please," coming from a man who commanded a financial empire, crumbled her defenses. She gave a small nod and let the blanket fall. As the doctor carefully peeled back the shredded blue uniform, Alejandro felt the air knocked right out of his lungs. Across her pale side, a gruesome bruise was blooming in deep purples and blacks, bearing the distinct imprint of Carlos's boot. She had intercepted a savage kick meant for the door, or maybe even the children, absorbing the impact with her own body without a second thought. The physician probed the area with expert fingers. Elena stifled a groan, biting her lower lip nearly to the point of drawing blood to keep from screaming in front of the boys. Hearing his protector whimper, Lucas started crying again, frantically stroking Elena's hand. "Don't cry, sweetheart. It doesn't hurt. Auntie Elena is tough as nails," she lied, her voice cracking with pain. She forced a smile for the boy even as tears streamed down her own cheeks. Alejandro had to look away for a moment. Guilt slammed into him like a sledgehammer. That injury was on him. His blindness, his absence, his idiotic belief that money could buy a stable home life. All of that failure was now branded onto this innocent woman's skin. "No clean breaks, but there is a severe hairline fracture," the doctor diagnosed, pulling out bandages and painkillers. "Breathing is going to be agony for a few weeks. You need absolute bed rest. No heavy lifting, no exertion, and absolutely no working." "You heard him," Alejandro said, turning back to face her. "You're staying here." Elena's eyes widened in panic. "Not here, sir. I live a long way out. I have to catch the last bus. If I leave right now, I might still catch it on the main avenue." "Elena, look around you," Alejandro said, gesturing to the raging storm outside and the police commotion inside. "You are not taking a bus, and you are certainly not going home in that condition. You'll take the guest suite." "But, sir, I don't have a change of clothes. I have nothing. And the boys, they can sleep with you if that helps settle them down." Alejandro made the final ruling. But the mere suggestion of being separated from Elena triggered an instant reaction from the twins. Mateo latched onto her neck so tight he nearly choked her. "Don't go!" the boy screamed. "The witch is going to come back!" Alejandro felt a sharp pang in his chest, realizing his own sons didn't trust him to keep them safe on his own. Their trust was in Elena. She was their sanctuary. "No one is coming back, Mateo," Alejandro said, placing his large hand gently on his son's head. But the boy refused to let go of the housekeeper. "Elena stays. We all stay." Alejandro scooped Lucas up into his arms. The boy fought it for a second, but quickly surrendered to exhaustion. The doctor helped Elena to her feet. They made their way toward the staircase, a slow, painful procession. Alejandro watched Elena struggle up the steps, leaning heavily on the banister, yet refusing to let go of Mateo's hand. That night, the invisible walls of social hierarchy within the mansion crumbled completely. Titles like master and servant vanished, leaving only two desperate adults trying to shield the shattered innocence of a pair of children. Alejandro settled Elena into the master guest suite, a space that boasted more square footage than the woman's entire home. The massive queen-size mattress seemed to swallow them whole. Elena lay right in the center, still clad in her tattered uniform after refusing a change of silk pajamas. The twins clung to her flanks, instantly claiming the deep, heavy sleep of the adrenaline crashed. Alejandro stood sentinel at the threshold, watching over the trio. Logic dictated he retreat to his quarters, shower, call legal counsel, but his feet refused to lift. Witnessing this stranger hold his sons offered a tranquility he hadn't tasted since becoming a widower. Yet it sparked a gnawing interrogation in his mind. Who was Elena really? Why would someone with so little be willing to sacrifice so much? 4 in the morning brought a suffocating silence, thick with the static of a storm that had passed but threatened to double back. Alejandro hadn't closed his eyes once. He remained perched on a leather armchair in the shadows of the guest room, keeping vigil over Elena and the twins like a penitent guardian. He had showered and changed, scrubbing the physical blood from his hands, but the stain of moral filth refused to wash away as he watched Elena breathe. Even in slumber, her brow carried a furrow of worry, a permanent etching of concern. Alejandro's gaze drifted to a worn, cheap fabric tote on the floor near the bed, the same bag she arrived with every shift. Driven by a curiosity he knew was invasive yet necessary, he rose silently and reached for it. He needed to understand the soul he had invited into his life and the lives of his children. He unzipped the rusted track, and the contents shattered his heart for the second time that night. There were no vanity items, no smartphone, nothing of material value. He found an empty plastic container that had once held rice, likely her only meal, a simple wooden rosary, and a crinkled envelope holding petty cash and loose change. Alejandro scanned the currency with a glance. It totaled less than $10. There was also a folded paper, an eviction notice for a tenement room in the slums across town. The deadline for payment was tomorrow. Alejandro's fist tightened, crumpling the page. Elena wasn't just working for minimum wage, she was dangling over the abyss of homelessness, enduring Isabel's screaming abuse. She weathered the starvation, the insults, and the physical threat just to scrape together enough pennies to keep a roof over her head. Yet, when she had the chance to flee or ignore the danger, she stood her ground for rich children who weren't even her own blood. The sheer magnitude of her dignity in the face of such poverty made Alejandro feel like the poorest man on earth. Despite his millions, he placed the bag exactly where he found it, pulled out his phone, and texted his personal assistant despite the ungodly hour. Pay off the entire debt for Building 404 on San Juan Street. Buy the damn building if you have to. No one gets thrown out today. Dawn broke with a cold, steel-gray light. The children began to stir, and Elena bolted upright with a sharp gasp of pain, servant instincts overriding her memory. "The children! Breakfast!" she exclaimed, struggling to swing her legs out. "Easy!" Alejandro's voice cut through the room from the armchair, stopping her cold. "You are off the clock today. And tomorrow." Elena blinked at him in confusion, the chaotic events of the previous night slowly trickling back into focus. She pressed a hand to her bandaged ribs and sank back into the down pillows. "Mr. Alejandro, I fell asleep. I'm so sorry." "What a disgrace," she whispered. "There is no shame in resting after a battle, Elena," he replied gently. But the fragile peace of the morning shattered abruptly. Alejandro's phone on the nightstand began to buzz with violent intensity. Not a single call, but a swarm of them, one after another. News alerts, PR crisis emails, urgent voicemails from his attorney. Alejandro frowned, grabbing the device. As he unlocked the screen, the top headline turned his blood to ice. Socialite scandal, fiancée of Alejandro Valdez alleges brutal assault. With trembling fingers, Alejandro tapped the link. A video began to play. It was Isabel. She stood outside a private clinic wearing a neck brace she didn't need. Fake tears cutting through makeup perfectly applied to look tragic and gaunt. A hive of microphones surrounded her. "I'm terrified for my life," Isabel sobbed to the cameras. "Alejandro is a monster. He came home last night drunk and high, and he beat me because I caught him with his mistress, the maid. She claims she walked in on us, in our own home, in bed together, with my stepsons watching. According to her, when she tried to shield the children from our depravity, we turned on her. She says she held me back while he beat her senseless." Alejandro felt the room tilt on its axis. The sheer audacity of the fabrication was breathtaking. Isabel wasn't just lying, she was performing. She had struck first, weaponizing the narrative of a battered woman to obliterate his reputation, and more cruelly, to utterly destroy Elena. "Sir, what is it?" Elena asked, noticing the blood drain completely from her boss's face. Alejandro didn't have a second to answer. A low, menacing rumble began to vibrate through the walls, sounding like a swarm of giant, angry hornets. He stepped to the window and peeled back the heavy velvet curtain just a fraction of an inch. The sight below made his stomach lurch. The main gate of the mansion was under siege. Dozens of news vans, paparazzi, and journalists were crushing against the iron bars. The relentless strobe of camera flashes bombarded the house with blinding bursts of light. Isabel hadn't just left, she had invited an audience. "Damn it all to hell," Alejandro whispered. "Sir?" Elena tried to stand up, spooked by the commotion outside. Alejandro spun around to face her. The softness from the night before had vanished from his expression. In its place was the hardened look of a general at war. Elena, listen to me closely. Stay away from the windows. Do not answer the phones, and for the love of God, do not let the boys turn on the television. What is happening? She asked, terror shimmering in her dark eyes. Isabel went to the press. She is telling the world you are my mistress and that we beat her together, Alejandro said, stripping away any sugarcoating. Elena covered her mouth, horrified. But that is a lie. I am a decent woman. I have my honor, I know it, and we will prove it. We will, but right now, in the court of public opinion, you are the villain of this story. Alejandro moved toward the door. I'm going down there. I have to stop this circus before Child Protective Services shows up to take the boys away for living in an immoral environment. The color left Elena's face. She knew exactly what those words implied. Foster care, separation. I will not let that happen, Alejandro vowed. But I need you to trust me one more time. It's going to get ugly. They're going to say horrific things about you on the news. I need you to be made of steel right now. Can you do that? Elena looked at the twins, still sleeping peacefully, unaware the world was trying to swallow them whole. She straightened her spine, fighting through the sharp sting in her ribs. The fear evaporated from her face, replaced by that same fierce determination that had given her the strength to stand up to Carlos. If it is for them, sir, I can endure anything. Let them talk. I know the truth, and so does the Lord. Alejandro nodded, struck by a wave of reverence for this woman. Get ready, Elena. Because once I am done with the press, we are going on the offensive, and we will show no mercy. Alejandro slipped out of the room, locking the door from the outside to secure their sanctuary. He fastened the top button of his fresh shirt, took a deep breath, and descended the stairs to feed himself to the wolves. The physical fight was over, but the media war had just begun. And this time, Isabel had the advantage. A lie sprints a mile before the truth can even tie its shoes. Alejandro threw open the heavy oak doors of the main entrance, and the roar of the outside world hit him like a physical blow. The high-pitched whine of news drones hovered above the property. The screaming journalists demanding details about the mistress, combined with the constant explosion of flashbulbs, created the atmosphere of a public execution. Roberto and his security team formed a human barricade on the porch steps, shoving back the more aggressive cameramen who were practically scaling the stone railings. In the eye of the storm, flanked by two lawyers in impeccable suits who looked like vultures, stood Isabel. She wore a neck brace like a trophy of war and dabbed at non-existent tears with a lace handkerchief. The moment she saw Alejandro emerge, she leveled a trembling, theatrical finger at him, ensuring every lens captured the accusation. There he is, Isabel shrieked, her voice cracking perfectly for the array of microphones surrounding her. The man who swore eternal love to me, only to try and murder me so he could be with the help. Look at him. He has no shame. The mob of reporters surged against the security line. The questions fired like bullets. Mr. Valdez, is it true you are maintaining an illicit affair with your domestic worker? Mr. Valdez, did you strike your fiancée in front of your children? Will you be resigning as bank president after this scandal? Alejandro didn't flinch. He walked steadily to the edge of the stairs, stepping into the fine drizzle that had started to fall again. He refused an umbrella. He let the rain soak his shirt and face, presenting a raw, unvarnished reality that stood in violent contrast to Isabel's manicured artificial image. He stood before the swarm, hands casually pocketed, locking eyes with the camera lenses. The weight of his silence crushed the chaos, turning the roar into anxious whispers. Isabel, sensing the script flipping, tried to shriek over the hush. "Stay back! I have a restraining order!" she screeched, clawing at her attorney's sleeve while Alejandro calmly produced a sleek tablet. Ignoring her completely, he stared into the national broadcast lens. "I'm not here to make a speech." His voice was low, steady, and cut through the air with a bone-chilling clarity. "I offer no apologies for protecting my kin. She claims assault. She paints Elena, my housekeeper, as a mistress and conspirator. She calls us monsters." He let the word hang there, stretching the tension until it nearly snapped. "Lies sprint, but digital memory is forever. This footage is from inside my home, recorded less than 4 hours ago. Raw, uncut." He plugged the device into the PA system Roberto had jury-rigged by the security post. Simultaneously, he airdropped the file to the 5 lead reporters standing front and center. "You decide," Alejandro said, hitting play. The audio blasted through the speakers. Isabel's voice, sharp, vicious, and unmistakable, flooded the street, silencing the wind itself. "He's gone, you moron! Get over here! Bring the boarding school forms. Let's sign this garbage. I want those little bastards shipped out by tomorrow." The color drained from Isabel's face. Her eyes went wide, bulging with sheer panic. She lunged for the speakers, desperate to strangle the truth, but her legal team held her back, knowing the ship was already going down. The footage rolled on the reporters' screens, their faces twisting in horror. There was Isabel, striking the housekeeper. There was Carlos, the lover, kicking in the nursery door. And there was Elena, small, fierce, using her own body as a shield to block the entrance. Finally, the frame showed Isabel locking lips with Carlos, plotting to bleed Alejandro's accounts dry. "It's fake! It's AI!" Isabel screamed, spinning toward the cameras in hysterics. "It's a deep fake! He has the money to fabricate anything! He can make up whatever he—" Alejandro raised a hand, freezing the video right as she confessed the plan to exile the children. "Artificial intelligence?" Alejandro asked, his lip curling with disgust. "Police already have your boy toy Carlos in custody. He just spilled his guts at Central Station to cut a deal on the breaking and entering charges. He confirmed you were the architect of the whole thing. He also confirmed you scratched your own neck for the photo op." A ripple of outrage swept through the press pool. The lenses, previously fixed on Alejandro as the monster, swung violently toward Isabel. The camera flashes felt like interrogation lights now. The poor victim's story evaporated in an instant. "Miss Isabel, did you plan to dump the kids?" "Isabel, who is Carlos? Do you admit to assaulting the staff?" Isabel stumbled back, cornered. She looked to her legal team, but they subtly shuffled away, distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout. Right on cue, the distant wail of sirens became deafening. 2 squad cars parted the sea of reporters. They weren't there for Alejandro. The lead officer, the same one who'd visited the house hours ago, stepped out, warrant in hand. He marched straight for Isabel, deaf to her shrieks of, "Do you know who I am?" "Isabel Torres, you are under arrest for filing a false report, defamation, aggravated assault, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The officer droned on, snapping the cold steel cuffs tight against her manicured, pristine skin. Alejandro stood like a statue on the steps, watching the takedown. There was no joy, no victory lap, just bone-deep exhaustion and a desperate need for her to vanish from his world. As the officer shoved her into the cruiser, she twisted around for one final glare. Her face was contorted with pure malice. "You'll never get rid of me!" she screamed through the glass. "Those brats will ruin your life just like they ruined mine, and that help will rob you blind." The squad car peeled away, dragging the poison out of his life. The press swiveled back to Alejandro, hungry for a soundbite to close the evening news. Alejandro leaned into the mic one last time. "The woman who saved my children today is named Elena," he said, his voice finally softening. "She isn't my mistress. She's the bravest soul I've ever met. And let me be clear, if anyone drags her name through the mud again or comes near my family, I won't bother with leaked footage next time. I will bring down the full force of the law and my entire fortune to bury them. Now, get off my property." He spun on his heel and marched inside, barking an order at Roberto to seal the reinforced gates. The heavy thud of the deadbolts sliding home was the sweetest symphony he had heard in years. The outside world was finally locked away. Now came the harder part, facing the wreckage inside his own walls. Broken, yes, but unlike the world out there, this could be mended. The mansion was quiet enough to hear a pin drop, but the air no longer carried the chill of a mausoleum. It felt more like a recovery room after a life-saving operation. Sterile and stinging with pain, yet holding the faint hope of survival. Alejandro strode through the foyer, stepping over scattered debris. He peeled off his sodden blazer and carelessly tossed the expensive fabric onto a Louis XVI chair without a backward glance. He climbed the staircase one heavy step at a time, feeling the adrenaline that had fueled his stand. During the media circus began to drain away, replaced by a crushing wave of bone-deep fatigue. At the second-floor landing, he noticed the guest room door standing slightly ajar. He paused before entering, peering through the sliver of space. Elena was up. She was perched gingerly on the edge of the mattress, moving with painstaking slowness to avoid disturbing the twins slumbering behind her. One hand clutched her bandaged ribs, while the other gripped the cheap plastic rosary Alejandro had glimpsed in her purse earlier. Her eyes were squeezed shut, lips moving in a frantic, hushed rhythm. But the plea wasn't for herself. Alejandro strained to listen. "Protect Don Alejandro. Keep him safe from those wicked people. Shield the children from all evil. Thank you, Blessed Mother, for keeping them safe." A lump formed in Alejandro's throat, thick and suffocating. He had to swallow hard, twice, just to keep his composure from shattering right there in the hallway. Here was a woman beaten black and blue, shamed on national television, and dragged into his nightmare, and she was praying for him. No requests for cash, no pleas for retribution. Just a prayer for the very man whose negligence had put her in the hospital. He nudged the door open. The hinges groaned, and Elena nearly jumped out of her skin. Seeing him, she scrambled to stand, but a sharp spasm of pain seized her, doubling her over. "Stay down," Alejandro commanded, crossing the gap in 3 long strides to steady her shoulders and guide her back onto the mattress. "Please, Elena, stop trying to wait on me just for tonight. Rest." She looked up at him, her dark eyes wide and brimming with fear. "Sir," I heard sirens, screaming. "Did they take her?" "Yes," Alejandro exhaled, pulling a chair close until their knees almost touched. "It's over. Elena, Isabel is in handcuffs. The footage is out, the police, the media, everyone saw it. The world knows what she is, and they know what you did." Elena lowered her gaze, flustered by the acknowledgement. "I only did what was necessary, sir. Any mother would have done the same. I mean, anyone." She corrected herself instantly, terrified she had overstepped by claiming that title. Alejandro caught the slip and shook his head firmly. "Don't apologize," he said, his voice fierce. "You were right the first time. A mother would have done that. Their birth mother would have done that. But me?" Alejandro rubbed his face, the self-loathing evident in his posture. "I should have been the one shielding them. I should have been here." "You work hard, sir," she interrupted softly. "You do it for their sake." "No, Elena. I buried myself in work to avoid this house. Looking at them hurt too much. They remind me of her. I was a coward," he confessed, speaking the truth he had run from for 2 years. "I invited a predator into our home just so I could outsource the heavy lifting of being a father. It almost cost my children their lives. If you hadn't been here—" He trailed off, the silence stretching between them. Behind her, the twins breathed in a soft, steady rhythm, blissfully unaware of the conversation reshaping their destiny. "What happens next?" Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper. "With Miss Isabel gone, I assume you'll be bringing in that governess from London everyone mentioned." I know I can't stay. After everything the news said, having me here will only damage your reputation further." Alejandro stared at her, stunned. The thought that she expected a termination slip after saving his family was ludicrous, insulting even. "Do you want to leave?" Alejandro asked. Elena's knuckles turned white around the rosary. "No, sir. I love these babies like my own flesh and blood. The thought of walking away breaks my heart. But I'm realistic. I'm just the maid who scrubs the toilets. You own the bank. Our worlds aren't meant to collide, especially not under a spotlight like this." Alejandro leaned in, and in a move that shocked them both, he enveloped her hands in his. Her skin was rough, calloused from labor, and radiating warmth. His hands were cool and impeccably manicured. Despite the textural difference, they fit perfectly against hers. "Our worlds collided the second you threw your body between my son's and that woman's boot," Alejandro murmured. "You're right, Elena. You can't just be the maid scrubbing toilets anymore." Elena's heart skipped a beat. She knew it. The axe was falling. She bowed her head, swallowing the bitter pill of resignation. "Understood, sir. I'll pack my bags the moment I can stand on my own 2 feet." "You're missing the point entirely," Alejandro insisted, squeezing her fingers to force eye contact. "I'm not firing you. I'm promoting you, but this isn't a standard payroll position." He released her hand only to fish a crumpled document from the interior pocket of his blazer. It was the eviction notice from her purse. "I saw this," he confessed bluntly. Burning with humiliation, Elena lunged for the paper, but he held it out of reach. "Sir, please, that's personal." "I own your apartment complex now," Alejandro stated casually, as if discussing the rain. "Closed the deal this morning at 5:00. The eviction is void, but I don't want you staying there. It's dangerous, and you belong where you're actually needed." Elena was reeling, her mind unable to grasp the magnitude of his actions. He bought the whole building? "I want you here, Elena. Not in the maid's quarters, in a real guest suite, whichever one you like. I want you appointed as the boys' legal guardian. I'm handing you full executive power over their schooling, medical decisions, and happiness. You're done being staff. You'll be family, and the stipend attached means you'll never lose sleep over a rent check again." Silent tears began to track through the bruising on her face, heavy and overwhelming. "Why?" she choked out. "Why do this for me?" Alejandro glanced at his sleeping sons before locking eyes with her, shattering the final wall between boss and subordinate. Because when I walked into that disaster and realized that all day my wealth was useless, you were the only authentic thing standing. When my sons look at you, they see love. When they look at me, they see a stranger. Ah, I need a teacher, Elena. Show me how to be the dad they deserve. I can't do this solo. I need you. It wasn't a marriage proposal, not yet, but it was something far more profound. It was a life pact. Elena wiped her damp face with the back of her hand. Watching Lucas and Mateo, she knew she wasn't staying for the money or the mansion. She was staying because those boys were her heart living outside her chest. "I'm in," she whispered. "On one condition." Alejandro smirked, expecting a request for a Ferrari or a bonus. "Stop saying my name like you're reading a memo," she said, finding her courage, "and learn to handle diaper duty. If I'm the guardian, you're the dad, and dads deal with the messy stuff." Alejandro burst out laughing, a genuine, rusty sound that startled them both. "You've got a deal," he agreed. Just then, Mateo stirred, blinking his eyes open to find his father and Elena holding hands and grinning. The kid couldn't grasp the legalities or social nuance, but he spoke the language of vibes perfectly. The fear was gone. "Is the witch gone?" the boy mumbled sleepily. Alejandro and Elena answered in perfect unison. "Yes, buddy, gone for good." Alejandro stood up, a massive weight lifted from his shoulders. The storm had broken. The mansion was a wreck, his reputation was on the line, and a legal nightmare awaited him. But looking at this makeshift family huddled together, he felt truly wealthy for the first time in ages. "Get some sleep," Alejandro said softly. "Tomorrow we start fresh." He eased the door shut and headed downstairs to rebuild his life brick by brick, this time on a solid foundation. 6 months later, the brutal winter had surrendered to a vibrant spring, transforming the Valdez estate. Yet, the most drastic shift wasn't found in the blooming garden beds, but in the air circulating within the stone walls. The house, once a cold, silent mausoleum, now hummed with beautiful chaos. Toys littered the foyer, a tricycle was parked next to the grand piano, and the halls echoed with laughter no longer silenced by fear. Alejandro strolled down the gravel path. In the backyard, loosening his tie with one hand while clutching a blue velvet box in his pocket with the other. His heart, usually beating to the drum of corporate stress, now raced with a different anxiety. A mix of excitement and teenage nerves he hadn't felt in decades. Unlike the past, that last visit had been a collision with a living nightmare. Today, he arrived early to keep a vow. He paused at the exact vantage point, right behind the ancient oak that had shielded him months ago. Visually, the tableau mirrored the past, yet the emotional landscape had shifted on its axis. The twins, Lucas and Mateo, were owning the swing set. They looked taller, cheeks flushed with vitality, pumping their legs to touch the sky. Gone were the stiff, uncomfortable designer outfits, replaced by denim shorts and superhero tees boasting battle scars of chocolate ice cream. And pushing them, with that same fierce dedication, was Elena, stripped of the maid's uniform and draped in simple cream linen that celebrated her sun-kissed glow. Her hair, once imprisoned in a severe bun beneath a cap, now cascaded freely over her shoulders, dancing with the wind. No yellow rubber gloves, no apron, and absolutely no trace of fear in her stance. She looked luminous, commanding the space not as hired help, but as the undeniable heart of this sanctuary. Alejandro lingered a moment longer, letting the quiet victory wash over him. The courtroom war had been savage. Isabel's legal team had thrown the kitchen sink. Slander, blackmail, rehearsed tears for the cameras, but truth is an immovable object. Between the surveillance footage, Carlos taking the stand, and the forensic audit exposing Isabel's embezzlement schemes, the verdict was absolute. 10 years of hard time, 0 chance of early parole. The witch wasn't a threat anymore, she was just an inmate number in a state file. "Daddy!" Mateo's shout shattered his reverie. The boy bailed from the moving swing with a daredevil leap that tore a startled cry from Elena's throat. But Mateo stuck the landing on the grass and sprinted toward Alejandro, with Lucas hot on his heels. The collision of 2 small bodies against his legs nearly floored him, but he scooped them up, one in each arm, spinning them until the air filled with their laughter. "You made it for snack time," Lucas cheered, planting a messy kiss on his father's cheek. Elena made chocolate cake, like a huge one. Alejandro caught Elena's eye as she approached, wearing a smile that was shy yet radiant. "So, plotting to make me fat too, are we?" She stopped just inches away. The magnetic pull between them was undeniable. For 6 months they had navigated a delicate choreography of respect and shared space. Alejandro had honored his promise. He mastered the art of diaper changes, late-night bottle feeds, and simply being there. And Elena had learned to let her guard down, seeing the man rather than the employer. She'd buried herself in books at night, finishing high school and starting teaching courses, backed by his unwavering support. "Someone has to keep the energy levels up in this house, Mr. Valdes," she teased. Though the title Mr. was just a playful artifact now, stripped of any rank. "The boys need sugar to keep running, and you need sugar to keep chasing them." Alejandro set the boys down and they bolted toward the patio table where the feast awaited. He stood alone with Elena in the dappled shade of the oak. "I told you to drop the mister." He took a step closer, breaching the professional distance with an intimacy that sent shivers down her spine. "Old habits, Alejandro," she whispered, and hearing his name on her lips felt like a benediction. "How was the bank?" "Dull. Just numbers. All I could think about was getting back here." He reached for her hands. They weren't rough anymore. Lotions and rest had softened her skin, though the steel in her grip remained. "Elena, I need to talk to you." Her smile faltered slightly. The shadow of past bad news still lingered. "Is something wrong? Is it Isabel's lawyers?" No, he cut in, lifting her hand to his lips. "Isabel is history. Evil has no place here. I want to talk about tomorrow." Alejandro exhaled, hunting for the right words. He had closed billion-dollar mergers without breaking a sweat. But standing before this woman, who had entered his life with a mop bucket and saved it with a heart of gold, he was petrified. "6 months ago, right here, you saved my life," he said. "Not just my breathing, but my actual life. You saved my sons, my soul, and taught me that a full bank account means nothing in an empty house." "Alejandro, you don't owe me a thing," she started. "Please, let me finish. I asked you to stay as a tutor. You said yes. I asked you to be family. You said yes. But I've realized that's not enough. Not for me." Alejandro released her hands and reached into his pocket. Elena's hands flew to her mouth, tears welling up in her eyes before he even reached into his pocket. He didn't drop to one knee on the cold marble of a ballroom floor. He sank right into the dirt, ignoring the grass stains ruining his expensive Italian suit pants. The box clicked open. Inside, there wasn't a massive, flashy rock like the one he had bought for Isabel. Instead, it held a delicate ring featuring a deep emerald framed by tiny diamonds, a piece that whispered of hope and new beginnings, not vanity. "Elena," Alejandro began, his voice cracking with emotion. "I'm not looking for a mother for my children. They made that choice a long time ago. I'm looking for a partner. I need the only person who has ever been brave enough to look me in the eye and give it to me straight. I love you. I love how you care for them. I love your laugh. And I love the peace you've brought to the absolute wreckage that was my life. Would you do me the honor of marrying me and legally adopting those 2 little tornadoes with me?" The garden went completely still, the silence broken only by the soft chirping of birds. Elena's gaze drifted from the ring to Alejandro and finally to the boys, who had paused their cake decimation to stare, eyes wide as saucers. "Are you going to marry my dad?" Mateo hollered from the table, his mouth stuffed with chocolate. The question snapped the tension instantly. Elena burst into a teary laugh and dropped to her knees, meeting him at eye level, forgetting protocol, forgetting the world. "Yes," she breathed, cupping Alejandro's face in her hands. "Yes, I'll marry you. And yes, I love you, even if you are hopeless at changing diapers." Alejandro slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. Then he kissed her. It wasn't some cold, technical Hollywood scene. It was a kiss poured full of gratitude, passion, and promise. A kiss that buried a dark past and welcomed a blindingly bright future. The kids didn't wait for an invitation. They barreled into them, turning the romantic moment into a pile of hugs, laughter, and stain and chocolate. "We're a team now," Lucas cheered, throwing his arms around Elena's neck. "We always were, sweetheart," she replied, kissing the boy's forehead. "Only difference is, now we share a last name." Twilight settled softly over the mansion. As the sunset painted the sky in violets and burnt oranges, Alejandro sat on the wooden bench with Elena resting on his shoulder, the kids playing at their feet with the rescue dog they'd adopted a week prior. Alejandro gazed back at the house. The windows were aglow, radiating a rich golden warmth. It wasn't just a cold stone structure anymore. It was a home. He thought back to the man who had arrived here months ago, alone, blind, and bitter, and looked at his reality now. Sure, he had lost a trophy fiancée, he had lost his status as the magazine's golden bachelor, and blown a small fortune on lawyers. But as he stroked his future wife's hand and listened to his sons laughing, Alejandro knew the absolute truth. He had just closed the best deal of his entire life. Elena looked up and caught him staring. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "That I got here early," Alejandro replied with a smile, "and this time I'm staying forever."